Listening to Bad Dog Agility, bringing you training tips, interviews, and news about the great sport of dog agility.
I'm Esteban.
I'm Jennifer.
And I'm Sarah, and this is episode 241. Today's podcast is brought to you by HitItBoard.com. HitItBoard.com has the innovative training tools you need for agility. Having problems with the dog walker A-frame? The HitItBoard can fix that. Your dog doesn't like tugging? They'll love the Tug It. Can't move your A-frame around by yourself? The Move It can. Go to hititboard.com and use discount code BDA10 to get 10% off your order. That's hititboard.com.
Today's podcast is also brought to you by OneTDC.com. Dog agility can be hard on your dog's body. Help keep their joints and muscles healthy with 1TDC. 1-tetradecanol complex is a clinically studied blend of unique fatty acid oils that can support your dog's joint health. 1TDC promotes a healthy inflammatory response from head to tail. All of our listeners will automatically qualify for a great 1TDC special offer by purchasing online at BDA1TDC.com. That's BDA, the number 1, TDC.com.
Today, we're going to be talking about speed rankings in dog agility, and we're going to be talking about our own speed rankings that we've put together, the Bad Dog Agility Power 60, the Preferred Power 60, the Breed 10, and then we're going to spend a little extra time on a brand new ranking that we just put out, which is the all-decade Power 70. And we'll start with just a brief explanation about what these rankings are and how we get them. We do have a previous podcast where we kind of go a little bit more in depth on the Power 60, the Preferred Power 60, and the Breed 10, but we'll kind of give a recap here. These are statistics that we put together based on AKC data. Why AKC data? Because it's available. So AKC puts out the results of every trial, and we put together a computer program that essentially grabs those results whenever they're available, and we have access to all of the results that way, and that's how we're able to do these rankings. And then when we first put these rankings together, we wanted to come up with something that really looked at speed. So when you think about a lot of the rankings that the organizations, for example, put out, it's often based on number of Qs. I mean, titles are often tied to number of qualifying runs. So that's how you're going to get your titles and get recognized that way. Some of the top dog rankings are often based on what's called speed points, which is you get a point for every second under time. But when you think about it logically, yes, the faster you are, the more speed points you have, but also the more you show, the more speed points you have. And in fact, it is such a, it correlates so strongly to number of shows that you go to. The example that I like to give that I think makes it really make sense to people is to say, let's say Esteban and I are racing our two dogs against each other. And let's say that I beat him by, let's just make it big. I beat you by 10 seconds, right? Like anybody in the sport of agility knows if you beat somebody by 10 seconds, you clobbered them, right? You absolutely clobbered them. Mm-hmm. But when I beat you by 10 seconds, let's say I got 20 speed points and you got 10 speed points, right?
Right.
So you've got 10, I've got 20. But let's say that now, I've got other commitments and I can't go to shows for the next several days. And you go to 3 more trials. And in each of those trials, you get about the same number of points, 10 points. Well, now you have 40 points, right? You went to 3 additional, you got 3 additional Qs, and each one of those you got 10 points. You have 40 points, and I still just have my 20, even though we know that speed-wise, I am way faster than you.
Right.
And this kind of illustrates the problem with points, with assigning points that go up and up and up as you show. And so when we put together our ranking, we wanted to do something that was based on actual speed. And the closest thing that we have in agility to that is yards per second. This is something that we can get from the results. And so the rankings that we put together are based on the dog's average yards per second.
Mm-hmm.
All right. So let's, before we get to the decade ranking, which is the brand new one, and we kind of want to talk about some of the trends that we saw there, we'll just clarify some of the questions that all three of us get asked every time we put out rankings. Jennifer brought this up to me today. She said, maybe we should answer some of these questions that keep coming up. So that's what we're going to do here today. And one of the ones that we often get is, well, is it based on, what is it based on exactly? Is it average? Is it people often think that it is the fastest run, and it is not. It is based on an average of that dog's runs. We take, if we're looking at a year in ranking, we take the entire year's worth of runs for that dog, and we get their average for jumpers, and we get their average for standard. And then the ranking is based on something that we came up with, power score, which is 2 times the standard yards per second plus 1 time the jumpers yards per second. So we just weighted standard a little bit heavier, since most final events are final events are usually standard type courses. And originally, when we were doing this, we were looking at ranking dogs against each other going into nationals, and nationals, the layout of it is typically 2 standard, 1 jumpers, and 1 hybrid. But that gets a little complicated since we don't have an equivalent on a weekend to weekend basis in hybrid. So that's where we came up with these numbers. And then these are the numbers that we have been running every year since the first time we did it. The other question that we get a lot is why are sometimes dogs ranked differently on our power rankings, which are based on the dog's height, versus our breed rankings. And the reason that we often get extra dogs in a breed ranking that we don't see in the crossbreed ranking is because for the Power 60 and for the preferred Power 60, we only rank dogs that have at least 5 jumpers and at least 5 standard runs at the master's level. And the reason is the fewer the number of runs, the more you're going to get a single non-representative run that really skews a team's results, right?
Yeah.
And we didn't want to have too many because we don't want to get back into that problem of you have to show a lot to be recognized.
To even be in the rankings.
To even be in the rankings. So we wanted to find a medium ground, and we chose 5 and 5 as being something that we felt like gave us enough to offset any one run while still including people that are not able to show as much. On the breed side, however, when we started looking deeper into the numbers, we found that especially when you get to some breeds that don't show an agility very often, or where the dog is just built differently, and these dogs may only get a few cues a year, but we wanted to include as many different breeds as possible and recognize those breeds. And so we chose, you only had to have 1 jumpers, 1 standard to be ranked in the breed. And so that's why you'll sometimes, if you compare the breed ranking to the power ranking, you'll sometimes see dogs in the breed ranking that have a great power score, one that should put them in the cross-breed power ranking, but they're not there. And the reason is they don't have that 5 and 5.
Right. I think 5 is even a small number. The more runs you have, when I'm looking at your data, the more information that I have. Jennifer's got this great border collie, Pink. If Pink's got 100 runs at 5 yards a second, I'm very confident that their speed on average is going to be around 5 yards a second. Now, let's say that there's some other border collie, right? And they have a great weekend and they average 3 runs together. And for some reason, the average is like 5.2. And everybody starts to get really excited about this dog. But that sample size is so small. And when it's all from one show, it can be something as simple as easy courses from the same judge who wheels quite generously. And that when we throw this border collie up against Pink at nationals, Pink is clearly the faster dog and ends up beating the dog by, like a full second or something when they both run clean. And so that sample size of 3 was simply too small. So in my opinion, 5 is even on the short side, and I don't think it's a bad thing to get bigger numbers, but we had to pick one arbitrarily. We went with 5.
That's right.
Yeah.
So let's talk a little bit about the new ranking, because this is something we've never done before. I think we started our rankings. Let's see, I can see here. We started our first rankings in 2014.
Oh, wow. That's like 5 or 6 years out.
Yeah. So we've been doing these rankings since 2014. And when I was pulling the rankings, the year-end rankings for 2019, I suddenly kind of was hit by the fact that, this is the last year of the decade. And I'm seeing all over the internet, kind of end of decade posts and retrospectives and look backs and things like that. And all of a sudden I thought, hey, I wonder what it would look like to to do a ranking of the best dogs of the decade, right? To really look at, across the past 10 years, who are the dogs that stand out? Statistics wise, right? Numbers wise, pure numbers wise. And that's when we decided to do this new ranking. We called it the 2010s All Decade Power 70. So what we did was, this is essentially the decade-long corollary to our Power 60 ranking, where it's per height, crossbreed. We take the top 10 dogs from each height. And what we did was we took every dog's year-end rankings for each of the 10 years of the decade, right? So every dog has basically 10 numbers there, right? They have their power ranking for each of the 10 years. Put all those together, take the top 10 without duplicates. So we take every dog's best year, essentially. Mm-hmm. So we are comparing every dog's best year to every other dog's best year in the last decade, and then coming up with a ranking. And we put the year that ranking came from. So it's interesting because we get to kind of recognize, kind of throw back to some earlier years, some of the real greats of the past 10 years in our sport who are no longer competing. And kind of remember them and recognize them. But we also get to compare, some of the great dogs from early in the decade to the great dogs of today, and kind of see how they stack up against each other. And also to see when their peak was, when their best year was. So some of these great dogs, which one year was their best year? And take a look at it that way. And all of that is wrapped up in the All-Decade Power 70. So why 70 and not 60? Our ranking has always been the Power 60, the Power 60. Well, the Power 60 came from, we wanted the top 10 dogs per height, and there were 6 jump heights. 60 dogs, there we go. Right?
8, 12, 16, 20, 24, and 26. That
was the original. And then AKC discontinued 26 and replaced it with 24C. So we still had 6. Great, right? Now we still have 60 dogs, right? But now when you look at the entire decade, there are 7 jump heights represented there, right? So that's why the All-Decade Power 60 becomes the All-Decade Power 70, as we take the top 10 dogs in the 7 jump heights that were run in AKC Agility in the past decade. Mm-hmm. Other than that, it is scored the same as our Power 60. It requires at least, for the individual years, it requires 5 and 5 of jumpers with weaves and standard. The power score is calculated the same, and that's how we got the ranking. Mm-hmm. All right, so I've covered all the details of what it is and how it works, and now we can get into some of the interpretations, which is always fun and exciting.
Well, first I want to start off by saying congratulations to Jennifer Crank, Border Collie Pink, 16-inch class. You are in there. You're on the all-decade team.
All right. Awesome.
How amazing that dog is. And then I'll congratulate my co-owner, Susan Frazier. She let us run our golden retriever, Gitchy. Gitchy is the only non-Border Collie in the 24C or 26-inch class. She made it in 26-inch. So that is quite cool. Okay, so now what do you guys think? I noticed a couple of things. The first thing that I wanted to talk about, Jennifer, I'm looking at the years, and there's a whole lot of 2018, 2019. Right? So for 24C, that makes sense because that was a new class, right? Popped up in 2018, so I wouldn't expect anything before that. So every dog from there is going to be recent. If you look at them, And something that we will talk about is which dogs have a Master Agility Championship or champion dogs, and which ones are national champions, meaning they've won the finals at nationals. And we're going to get a count on that. But that's the one class, right? There's very few, or I think there might even be none, like in the way of national champions and very few mocks because of the championship title, because these dogs are relatively young. It's a new class, 24C. Those are the dogs that would normally jump 20 inches. And they're in 24C. They probably have international aspirations. So I think that kind of explains the recency bias for that class. But what about all the other classes? What do you think about that?
Yeah, I agree 100%. Looking through the first time I saw this list, and I got a sneak peek of it prior to this week, I really expected to see more of those kind of older numbers. I mean, yes, we have some that aren't within the last 2 or 3 years, but we have a lot of 2018, a lot of 2019. And I think it really just stems from the evolution of the sport and progressing more towards speed. Handling's getting better. Dogs are getting faster. We're pushing more for speed, more so than we maybe did back in 2012 or 2013, where there was more emphasis on, consistency and handlers not wanting to take as much of a risk. And we're getting more diversity in certain areas. So you're seeing people compete against one another in their areas. The sport grows. So I think there's a lot of factors to demonstrate the more recent years. So it really, I feel like, is a testament to some of those older numbers and those older dogs in the 14, 15, 16 that are still holding up against the current numbers, and these handlers that are going out there. And a lot of these people setting the goal of being on the power scores. Right. It's now a thing. I feel like in my area teaching classes, it's a thing. People will come in and they will brag to me because they made their breed score, or they'll set that as their goal. So It's certainly changing the emphasis of what people are aiming for.
Yeah, I really like those breed rankings in particular. It's very hard to be top 10 for your entire height, right? You're talking about only 10 dogs out of thousands for any of the given heights. Especially if you happen to be a non-border collie, right? We see here very clearly that it pays to get a border collie if you want to be very, very fast in this sport.
Although, to be fair, there are plenty of border collies competing that didn't make the top 10 also.
Absolutely true. But if you're talking about, I want to get there, I think, and you're talking about a height of, we can start at 16, 20, 24, 24C, 26. That's 50 of the 70 dogs. 46 of them are border collies.
Yeah.
Right. So border collies bleed all the way into the 16-inch class, which is arguably one of the most diverse classes in terms of breed representation in the AKC. So I think that's a really interesting stat there.
Yeah, I love hearing Jennifer say that. She's brought us a little bit of an outside perspective because she joined us as part of Bad Dog Agility and as part of the podcast and as an instructor a couple of years ago, but well after we had started these rankings. And so we get to hear a little bit of what people are thinking and feeling about these, outside of our little bubble here. And so hearing her report back that, when they do brags that people are talking about this, I really, really do love that. And I think that's one of the interesting things looking back. When we first did our podcast to kind of talk about the rankings, it was very much like, here's the rankings, here's what we're doing, here's why we made the decisions that we did. But we didn't have all of this years and years of what is the fact that we are even doing these rankings, what effect is that having on the sport? It was something that we were interested in. But I'm really excited to see that other people are really excited about it. And we get emails every time we put them out. We see it kind of go all over Facebook when we first put them out. And I'm very personally happy and gratified to bring so much excitement to people and to hear people make this part of their goal structure for them and their dogs.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think it's great. I think it's a great way to look at things, and it gives people some direction and it gives people some goals. And, I have a ton of students who go to one national event a year, whether they just go to the breed specialty or they just go to AKC nationals. And, it leaves them with a little bit less direction for the other, 8 to 9 months. Yes, when they're getting close to nationals, they're prepping. But the couple months after nationals, where are their goals? What are they doing? And for many of them, they don't want to go out and do the chasing of the cues for invitational. So they have a Weim, or they have a Doberman, or they have a Keys Hound, and they don't want to chase the cues, but they need a goal. And I tell them a really good one is to say, okay, let's see what you can do in your breed in terms of speed. Go out there and be the fastest Brittany Spaniel, or, the fastest, Weimar Honor, even if that means not going to enough shows to qualify for invitational, but to go out there and get some consistency, get some good scores. And I think it's good for them. So it's one other goal. It's one other measure of performance that we can add to our, add to the table there.
All right. Now, Jen, I'm going to put you on the spot here. Some people have complained in the past that AKC National is a little too conservative, that not requiring, but basically it takes 3 clean runs in each of the first 3 rounds, the preliminary rounds, to make it to the finals for just about any height. Obviously, the big height, 24C or 26-inch being the exception. There's so few dogs entered in that class. 14 of these 70 dogs are national agility champions. Okay, and that only counts the dogs, right? Because there are several dogs who have won that event more than once. But 14 out of 70. So do you think this debunks that theory that only slow dogs are going to, I don't want to say slow dogs, but that a fast dog isn't going to have a chance or isn't going to win? Or how do you think this affects that?
Yeah, I think this absolutely proves that a little bit wrong. I know what you're talking about. A lot of people say, oh, well, the fastest dogs aren't necessarily going to make finals at AKC Nationals, or the fastest dogs aren't going to be the ones to win because, it's really difficult to go 3 clear. It's very difficult to make it into finals. Even if you make it in through challengers round, you still had to run 2 clear. So, the fastest dogs might not be the most consistent ones, but this is somewhat proving that wrong, because of the fastest 70 dogs over the last decade, you just said 14 of them are national champions. And that's a high percentage when you look at percentages. Mm-hmm. So we are saying that these dogs that are going out there and winning nationals aren't dogs that are, slow and just, being able to run clean because they're going slow. They're going out there and they're running clean, they're running consistent, and they're putting in smoking times that are holding up against dogs over the past 10 years. So I, for one, am a huge fan of the format of AKC Nationals. I really like the structure. I really like the event. I really like how it's done. And I do think that this is going to kind of prove that maybe AKC is doing it the right way. Yes, they're adding some consistency of 3 clears, but they're still pulling in some of the fastest dogs our sport offers.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, my thought there has always been that our sport is large enough and there are enough dogs competing that if you have a dog that is not consistent but is smoking fast, there's probably another dog out there that is just as fast as yours with more consistency, Right. And so there are enough dogs to fill in there, right? To have it all. There's enough dogs that have all the skills and have the speed and can put it together on that particular weekend, so that you don't end up with, basically eliminating a large portion of fast dogs and being left with, quote, substandard dogs. And I think you even see this basically internationally, right? Because it's hard to go to FCI Agility World Championships and to run those rounds clean, and to, I think especially at the 24-inch height, to keep all those bars up, right? And the question is, well, are these really the best dogs in the world? And I think the answer is yes, they are, because for every dog that went there that you hung your hopes on and they knocked a bar, there was another dog that didn't knock a bar and was also amazing and smoking fast with great skills. So I think the pool is big enough that we can have it all. We can have speed, we can have consistency, we can have hard courses that really challenge the handling. We're not going to end up with so few dogs that can do all those things at once that we don't have a good representative champion.
Yeah, I think those are really good points. All right. So now if we're thinking, as Jennifer pointed out, that it's all the recent years that are getting these really fast yards per second, these really high power scores, what is the reason for that? And, I'll start with the very obvious one. The first thing everyone's going to say is running contact. So many dogs, especially the very top dogs, and generally these fast dogs are, as we know, aggregating kind of at the top, they're going to have a disproportionate number of handlers who go out and get the running contact. So yes, I'm going to concede that right away. Absolutely running contacts. And there are more every year. It's not like running contacts appeared in 2015 and we've been getting the same number. I feel like every year there are more running contacts. Jennifer, what do you think?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, looking over the list, some of the larger dogs I don't know as well. I'll be the small dog representative. You talk about the border collies and the big dog class. But looking at the small dogs, I mean, I know for a fact right now looking at this that, the top 8-inch dog, the top 12-inch dog, and the top 16-inch dog have running contacts, or running dog walk and running A-frame. When I get into the larger classes, I don't 100% know whether they do or don't. I happen to know these dogs personally in the smaller class. But yeah, the running contacts are going to be a huge factor on why we're seeing the faster times more recently. I know we talked about it a little bit before we started recording, but the pause table being another one, the removal of the position from the pause table. So how many people going back into 2010, 11, 12 were losing time because they were arguing with the dog on the table? That's probably going to affect more just their standard yards per second. That's not going to affect their jumpers, but it comes into an average. So the running contacts are certainly playing a huge role in the kind of recent trend for those faster scores.
Yeah. And so what do you think now about judges? And when I talk about judges, I'm talking about the difficulty of the courses that they create. And so are courses overall easier, harder, or the same? And I think here, since we're talking about the all-decade rankings, I think let's talk about over 10 years. So I think over 10 years, what do you guys think? Harder, easier, same? I
think there was a phase in the middle, right before Premier, when the courses were more difficult than they are now. I've thought that for a while, and I still hold true. Before we had Premier, before AKC offered that classes, the master's courses were getting more difficult because that is when we saw kind of this concept of, a backside. But we didn't have Premier, so let's put the backside in the regular course, or let's make the standard and jumpers a little bit more difficult. When AKC added the Premier, I felt that the tendency at that point was, well, if you want to throw something really hard, if you want to throw a backside, if you want to throw in something super technical, go put that in Premier. Those are the people that want the challenge. The people that are doing, just the master standard and master jumpers, they want a nice flowing course with moderate challenge. So we kind of saw this spike up for a couple of years where things got more difficult. And then I kind of saw it level out and balance back out when Premier was added. So that's kind of more recently. So I think right now courses are pretty good. There was a spike there in the middle that's maybe affecting some of those years. I don't know my numbers and my stats. I know exactly what year Premier was added. But I remember when Premier got added, thinking that the regular courses were getting easier.
That is very insightful.
Yeah, that was the exact that was my exact thought process too. Was that the addition of Premier took some pressure off of the course design of your regular classes, but I don't really have too much to back that up. And I also think that difficulty is very, very variable and can vary wildly in geography. So I think that where Jennifer is, there's a lot of high level agility happening in that area, and there's a lot of desire for challenge. That I think there are other areas of the country that prefer an easier course, a more flowing course.
We don't want to single out those regions. Yeah, I have a guess, but I'm not going to say it out loud. right. They'll all be mad at me.
Right. But and I think also I think that I feel like recent years, like the last 2 to 3 years, there has been an even greater focus on our contact approaches. With the speed of the dogs. And that's good from a safety perspective, but it's also going to speed up the courses essentially, right? When you have like easy contact entrances and exits, which we want for the safety of the sport, it also speeds up the time.
Right.
Yeah, I think other course design factors. I mean, there's probably a lot if we really thought about the last 10 years. I know some of my fastest yards per second are going to be on courses where there are no tunnels. So when they change the rules to
Nice.
only two passes through the tunnels, that's going to affect things a little bit.
The chute went away.
Yeah, the chute went away. I mean, there's a lot
I didn't
of
think of
factors
that.
over
That
the
is a
10
big,
years.
I got to think that's a big one.
Yeah,
It's gotta be a big one. Maybe especially
we spend
for little
a lot
dogs.
of time in our area walking a course and asking, is this going to be good for our power scores? It's a big thing for us in our area because it's something fun and something to aim for, and we'll look at a course and, or looking at how the judge wheeled it and say, oh, this is going to be a good one to give us a really high score, really work hard on this one or push on this one. So I've paid a little bit more attention to what trends will help give us those faster scores than maybe some people have.
Nice. And now I think we've not talked about, I think the other obvious thing that's evolved over the last 10 years, and that would be handling ability, handling styles, techniques that we're using on course. What do you guys think? I think it's obvious, but let's just make sure we all agree. Let me start with Jennifer. Okay, let me start with Sarah.
Yeah, so I'm a little less certain about that. So what I think has probably changed is not necessarily the handling, but I guess it's tangential to handling, and that's like the style of running all out, running fast, creating smooth lines, really pushing for speed. I think that handling has evolved, but I think that probably has more of an effect on whether or not dogs are cueing, which is something we haven't mentioned, but it's a big factor because every in cue affects your power score not at all, right? So every bad run you've ever had that resulted in an in cue did nothing to your power score. Your power score didn't go up, it didn't go down because all we have access to is your qualifying runs. Mm-hmm. So I think that the handling has evolved, and I think that that it is reflected in people qualifying more often. I don't know how much it has affected speed.
Well, I'm going to stop you right there and say maybe we're talking about two different populations. When I look at these 70 dogs, we're looking at top of the top of the top.
True.
And so maybe handling evolved at a faster rate for the very best handlers than for the middle 50%, then certainly the bottom 25%, maybe there was no evolution at all, or maybe that bottom 25% is always newcomers.
Right.
And so, I think you could have differential rates of improvement of handling. Jennifer, what do you think about all this?
Yeah, I think, again, with the evolution of the sport, we're seeing changes in all aspects, more of a desire to push and run faster, more of a desire to run assertively. The handling's getting better. Access to the handling is getting better. One thing not pertaining to the handling, but, if I say the breeding of dogs and the genetic component for more speed and more power, you're seeing a few mixed breeds on there that, we didn't have a lot of mixed breeds in 2010 and 2011. I'm not sure when AKC allowed them, but, we're seeing some dogs. I think looking through the list, the 12-inch class had the most diversity of breeds, several mixed breeds on there. We saw some mixed breeds in some other heights as well. So I think there's a lot of factors that are allowing the sport to get faster and get better in more recent time. And the question kind of becomes, well, where do we max out? Where do we get to a point where we've bred the fastest dogs? We have the most athletic handlers. We're pushing the dogs as much as we can. But certainly, better handling is helping. I think it almost kind of goes back to the part Sarah said about the handler's desire to really start to push and go all out. I know for me personally, over the last 10 years, I'm far more willing to go to a show and really run my hardest and drive my hardest now than I used to in 2010 or 2011. Is my dog faster now than then? Maybe not. Maybe I had two dogs at the exact same speed, but my running mentality, my thought process, my mindset is different now than it was 10 years ago, which would be affected and shown on these scores. And I think looking again at some of these people, some of them that I know, I think they would argue the same thing, that even if their dog was the same speed in 2017, 2018, and 2019, that in 2019, they were probably running more assertive and driving more aggressively and pushing more. And that's why that year's scores are showing to be the most impressive.
And I think that's kind of a lesson in how to push yourself to be better, because what I would expect happens is that when people start really pushing themselves and really going for it on every run, what happens is at first they probably mess up more runs. Right? They do something that they can't quite get there. They aren't sure they can get there. They misread the timing or whatever. But those runs don't end up in the power score anyway, right? But the more you do that, the more often you are having that style and qualifying. And then when you do qualify, those times are going up and up and up until after that initial dip in Q rate, you're now kind of back to your original Q rate, but with a faster overall time.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and great point about the All-Americans. I should have mentioned that. There were 3 All-Americans in the ranking, I believe, just 3, and they were all in the 12-inch class. And actually 3 is quite a lot. In 8-inch? Okay, yeah, so 4, yeah. Right? And they're all in the 8 and 12-inch class. So of the 20 dogs there, what is that? 20% are All-Americans. So that, I think that's worth noting, certainly. Yeah, I think I agree with all that. That is super interesting. So the last thing that we didn't talk about, well, actually, Jennifer, you did kind of mention it a little bit, even when you were talking about your own dogs. And this is something that I've been thinking about a lot with golden retrievers. I guess we can talk about the few dogs at the very top. I tend to think those dogs are always outliers anyway. But if you look at border collies or shelties as a whole, like the entirety of the breed, or maybe just the top half of them, which is still hundreds or thousands if we're talking about border collies, over 10 years, are they physically different? Have breeders been breeding for different qualities or mental qualities? And we feel like that's contributing. It's not just the better handlers and the better surface. Surface is something else we didn't mention. I definitely want to ask you about that. So start with the breeding, then tell me about surfaces and indoor shows. And yeah.
Yeah, I think when we look at surfaces, starting with that one, a little less controversial, you're going to get really into kind of region. The idea of an outdoor show still is kind of like, what? People still show outside? Because being in Ohio, we haven't shown outside. I mean, I show outside.
Ever? Like even in the 2000s? Or
I mean, yeah.
Like
back then. Yeah. But like looking at a lot of the recent scores, I think Pink's score comes from 2018. I mean, she's only 4. She's only 4 years old now. I mean, she's never shown outside except for a few times at USA National. So, our surface is very predictable. It's going to be turf. It's going to be the same every time. It's going to be the same length. It's not wet. It's not dewy. It's not deep sand, versus other regions and other areas that have more variability in surface, whether you're always running in dirt and that slows the dogs down. Maybe that same dog that runs in dirt a lot in Florida, running in, Ohio on turf, the speeds might be different. So I think you have a little regional kind of surface aspect to that as well. When you talk about breeding and kind of this idea of getting faster and faster dogs, I don't even know that it's necessarily the breeding element. A little bit of it is how the dogs might be brought up now compared to how they were brought up 10 years ago. Again, I'll use myself as an example, but, my recent dogs are brought up very much on the idea that we're going to promote speed in everything we do. Everything we do from the time you're a puppy, it's going to be speed. We're going to push for it. We're going to go fast. I'm going to build you up in a way that we always, put the speed involved instead of what I feel like I used to have of like, okay, train the dog, kind of this idea of accuracy first, then add the speed. Let me get the cues. Okay, now that I'm cueing more regularly, now I'll see if I can go a little faster. And sometimes that might not be till the dog's 5, 6, 7. So I think it's a little bit of a different mindset in terms of how the dogs are brought up. But I do think there's a breeding component as well. In a lot of breeds, you have kind of lines. You have more of a working line versus a conformation line, or like in Shelties, more of a conformation versus an obedience versus an agility. And a lot of the dogs that are being bred for agility are, bred for a little bit more intensity, a little bit more toy drive, versus the conformation ones are going to be built a little bit different. What they want in the conformation ring is different than what they want in the agility ring. And we're seeing more of a split over the years. I think that's true in a lot of breeds. So, the dogs that you had running in 2010 might have at that time been more all around Shelties. And now 10 years later, we see lines of Shelties that are really specifically bred for agility, where before you just went to get a nice dog and did agility. Now you're going in and saying, okay, well, I want a Sheltie specifically bred for agility with a little bit more speed and intensity. So I think, that's a factor as well in terms of just the evolution of the sport and some of the dogs that maybe are a bit more genetically gifted over the last, several years here, 2-3 years.
Yeah, I totally agree.
Yeah, there was one more, I guess, kind of artifact in the numbers that I wanted to point out because it is a reflection of the history of the past decade, and that is this whole interaction between the 24-inch class, the 24C class, which is called 24 Choice, and the 26-inch class. So the brief history lesson there is that it used to be there was the 24-inch jump height, and then there was this optional 26-inch jump height, and anybody could choose to jump the 26-inch jump height. But actually, anybody could jump their own height or higher at any time, right? So if you had a 20-inch dog, you could jump 20, you could jump 24, you could jump 26. And sometimes people would do that to work their way up in height, for instance. And then they got rid of the 26-inch height class, and they introduced the 24C, which was the 24-inch choice. And the idea there was to separate the optional 24-inch dogs, the dogs that were choosing to jump 24, from the dogs that measured 24, right? But before they added that 24C class, you had plenty of non-24-inch dogs jumping in the 24-inch class. And so, you talked a little bit about how we see a lot of recent years in these rankings, 2019, 2018, 2017. The big exception to that, of course, is 26-inch because it has gone away in recent years. But the other exception to that is the 24-inch class. It has a lot of those earlier years, early-ish, 2016, 2015, 2017. And I think that at least part of that is that you are getting into those rankings now where you have some number of years where non-24-inch dogs could run and be ranked in 24 in the 24-inch class, right? And then you had a number of years where they couldn't. So, for instance, I can pick out one for a fact because they are in both the 20-inch they're in both the 24-inch ranking and the 24C ranking, which we know those are mutually exclusive classes. So we know that this dog is not a true 24-inch dog. And that is...
you mean they were in 20?
No, 24 and 24C. You can't be in both of those classes, right? Because you can only do 24C if you're not a 24-inch dog. And right, you can only do 24C
but if you're 20. If you're a 24-inch dog, you can do 24C.
You cannot do 24C if you're a 24-inch dog.
If you're a 24-inch dog, even if you're a border collie or whatever, you have to
stay. Yes.
Okay.
Right. You cannot go to 24C. So that gives us...
Okay, yeah, it's coming back to me now.
Yeah. Can we have this discussion? Right. So, and that is Dudley Shoemate's National Agility Champion bird because that dog is ranked here both in the 24-inch class for 2016 and the 24C class for 2019. So we can say with certainty that dog is not a 24-inch dog because then they wouldn't be able to be 24C now. So that's like one of those artifacts of timing where before 24C existed, she could jump in 24. But that's why you're going to get some earlier years in the 24-inch ranking because you are including these really, really fast world team aspiring dogs that chose to jump higher. And usually the reason that they're doing that is because they're highly competitive. They're working towards going to tryouts, right? They want to jump a height that's closer to the height they have to jump at tryouts. No fault to them, but we do see that in the rankings.
Yeah.
All right. Did we hit all of the interesting little quirks of the numbers? Oh, there was one other thing that I thought we would just take this opportunity to share, just for those people who really like to get deep into numbers. When you have a lot of data, one thing that you'll find is that you'll find issues with the data itself. Right? Mistakes have been made. And of course, there are millions of runs, millions, literally millions. And so, of course, there's going to be the occasional mistake. When we first pulled this ranking, there were a couple of dogs that we thought, whoa, how did that dog get to be number one, that particular breed? And I've never even heard of them. And I've been in the sport for 20 years, Oh, and wait, they have a 17 yards per second for jumpers, right? How did that happen? And when we looked at the numbers, we found that there would occasionally be a run, for instance, where the yardage was listed as, over 1,000 yards, right?
There'd be an extra zero.
They'd
right?
Lose
the decimal point. Someone would do a run in 4 seconds instead of 40 seconds.
Right, exactly. And so we had to kind of go through and find where things were clearly wrong and just eliminate those results from the rankings. But it does happen. I could give you some examples, but I think we ended up, I think over the last 10 years, I think there were only like maybe 100 runs that we had to go and clean up.
It's not bad.
Not bad. All right. Well, I think we covered all of the things that we wanted to talk about. I hope people enjoy this decade ranking, kind of honoring those dogs from the entire past decade as we start a new one here in 2020.
And last podcast before Westminster. So you guys are hopping on a plane, Jennifer and Sarah. I will not be at Westminster this year. Sarah will be. The other Sarah Baker, our sponsored athlete, will also be there. Of course, Jennifer Crank is going to be there. 2-time champ, Pink defending. She will also be there with Swift. So make sure you jump on the
before and after.
Before and after.
Yeah,
for Westminster, you can follow along.
That's right. So for those of you who have not joined one of our before and afters before, it's an online course that we do at several big events a year, where we have athletes that will analyze a course map before they run. So they'll put their thoughts down in video form, saying what they think about the course, what they think about the challenges, what's going to be their specific plan, and why they're making the choices that they're going to make before they get to see anybody run it. Right?
Very useful. It's like no cheating. Everyone looks like a genius after they run. Oh, this, that, blah, blah, blah. What about before you run? These people are committing to it and putting it down for you guys to see.
Exactly.
So I think that's very good. And you're looking at the very best dog.
Yep.
Sarah Baker's going to be there with Hops, Swift, Pink. We're talking about 4 national championships and the individual overall medal at the Agility World Championship.
Exactly. So those are the 3 dogs. Yeah. So those are the 3 dogs that 2 handlers, 3 dogs that we'll be covering for the before and after. And then that's the before part. The after part is that after they run, good or bad, they analyze their run to let you know how things went and if their plan changed and if it did, why, and where their timing was good and where they wish they had chosen something else. So that is the before and after, and it's available for registration right now. And there will be a link on our website.
See how it goes.
Yep.
Knock on wood, right? Bad Dog Agility always had a dog in the finals every year we've been, right?
Yeah. Yep. So, all right. Well, that's it for this week's podcast. We'd like to thank our sponsors, hititboard.com and 1TDC.com. Happy training.